Good morning, church. We're about to launch into a new series this month, the month of July. I have always wanted to do a series with a student, and this year I've had the opportunity to work with many students, and Payton, leading out in the Apologetics club at the academy, has been a blessing. And it kind of began really in 2020 when the youth came together and we decided that we were going to talk on faith. And we realized that there's a lot of things happening in our world today. The need for Christian apologetics has never been greater. Within many churches today, we are witnessing a large scale of departure from faith. There are even some pastors in many churches that are leaving the faith altogether. Alternative religions and cults are exploding globally. Hybrid religions are popping up on a religious landscape. Tolerance for any belief system and any behavior has become the new golden rule. Many today hold that anything can be true for the individual, but nothing can be true for everyone. Meanwhile, atheists and agnostics are more militant and vitriolic than ever. Naturalists and evolutionists continue to portray those who believe in the Genesis account of creation as intellectual Neanderthals. The idea that the Bible could be compatible with science evokes laughter in many institutions, especially the ones that our young ones are preparing to go to, even in Christian institutions. Worldview confusions is pervasive, with many around the world now embracing agnosticism, materialism, rationalism, scientism, moral relativism, postmodernism, atheism, pantheism, monism, and all of which stand against Christianity. The involvement of countless Christians around the world is necessary if we are to have an opportunity to speak into those spaces. As Pasco once said, the entire ocean is affected by a single pebble. And so as we begin and launch into this series, a lot of people have asked questions, even inbox me at times on social media or text me, where does God stand? In light of political issues that are happening around the world today, is God left or is God right? In light of some of the issues that you are seeing right now on your television screens and the news medias, people are asking, where does God stand? I can tell you this, God is neither left or right. Why? As God said himself, my kingdom is not of this world. And so as we launch into this series, you're going to hear some things as we begin to present God using what Jesus Christ said to do. Love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. God says in Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18, come, let us reason. And so this series, The Reason for God, is going to be kicked off by our student pastor, Payton Arnett.
Happy Sabbath. God is good, and all the time. I am ecstatic for this series. It's been in the works for a while now. And today is the day. I got a physical paper outline because I'm like that. Before I go any further, I want to pray and ask that these words will not be my words spelled. Dear Lord, thank you that we're able to gather here today. I pray, Lord, that this message will not be mine, but will be yours. I pray that we will be reminded of the reason for you and our need for you, because we need you in the world today. Amen. Amen. We often ask the question, why does God feel distant? We sometimes feel like he's not there. And I think this question, why does God feel distant, kind of leads to a second question, which we see in the world today a lot. And that question is God out there at all? When I said God is good all the time, the second question could be, does God even exist? And I think as believers, we have to know why we believe God exists, right? The reason for God. When we ask, Is God distant? Why does God feel distant? Maybe we ought to reframe the question. Maybe he's not distant from us. Maybe we're distant from him. Maybe we can't place all the blame on him, right? If someone's distant, it takes two in a relationship. There's that analogy. There's the footprints in the sand, right? Where the man's talking to Christ. It says, I only see one set of footprints. Where were you? He says, those are my footprints. That's when I carried you. I wasn't distant. You just couldn't see me. And that's not on me, God says. This world is full of division, of hate. Every single issue is used to categorize and divide people. You believe such and such, oh, you're in this category. You believe that, you're in this category. We don't actually have dialogue about disagreements. We just categorize you, and that's that. And God is used as a tool in many cases, and many of us choose to be distant from God to make things easier. But you get to know somebody by learning about that person, right? When you meet someone new, shake that person's hand, you ask questions about that person. You say, okay, what do you do for a living? Maybe if you're a college student, what do you study? What's your major? You ask, what's your job? What's your story? You learn about people. And our relationship with God is no different. We ought to study him. We got to learn about him. We got to know why we believe in him in the first place. And you find truth by pursuing truth as well. We can't just sit here and expect it all to come to us. When he's distant, some of that responsibility is on us too, to put in that effort to pursue him. He pursues us. But Christ is a gentleman, right? He knocks on the door. He won't open the door. You got to choose to open that door first. And as we go through this series called The Reason for God, it's based on this book by Timothy Keller, who, by the way, is a pastor in New York. So he knows a thing or two about answering tough questions and being in a pretty secular environment. And there's a lot in this book to unpack, and there's a lot outside this book that will be included in this series as well. But when we think about conversion stories, because I did want to bring up a story of Lee Strobel. Many of you know Lee Strobel, some may not. If you don't, Lee Strobel started off this pursuit, this journey of looking for God, by actually not looking for God at all. It occurred to me a while back that when Strobel began this journey looking for the evidence for God, he didn't start off by saying, does God exist? He says, doesn't God not exist? He came in with the presupposition saying, I don't think he exists, and I'm going to prove my presupposition. Long story short, after this year and a half of Lee Strobel investigating this evidence, by the way, he was doing this to prove his wife wrong. They were both atheists. His wife comes home one day and says, honey, I'm a Christian. I'm going to church now. He hated that. He hated that. So he said, okay, I'm going to go on this journey. I'm going to prove her wrong. I'm going to come home with a big manifesto of why she's fallen into this cult. And at the end of that year and a half, I don't know, literally or figuratively, but he fell on his knees and said, okay, God, you win. And he gave in and said, okay, I've seen the evidence. It's insurmountable. And he came, and now he's a pastor. And he's written many, many books. Not all of us have a conversion story quite like that. But God has used apologetics to bring me closer to Christ by learning more about him. I think back on my life and I realize that we're all different people, and God can use these areas to reach us in ways that we don't even realize. I can remember when I was a little kid, there would be, anyone remember when you were in like grade school, elementary school, and there'd be that one kid in the class who just said nonsensical stuff, like totally ridiculous things that nobody should believe. I hated that. When I was a little kid, if somebody in the class would say something outrageous, like, oh yeah, I have this little toy that's worth like $10,000. Prove it. I don't believe that. That's ridiculous. So from a young age, I remember thinking that, having a high regard for truth. And then God brought me to the field of apologetics, where I realized, oh, there is proof for this. There's reasons for what I believe. It's not blind faith. And we as a church have to know how to defend our faith in this world. You hear so much things today, left, right, everywhere and all above, about God. But we ought to know what we believe and why we believe it. Because if you're confronted with questions about your faith, and your foundation isn't strong, you will fall. And when someone asks you about your faith, and if you can't provide some sort of answer, if there's no dialogue there, That's not going to be showing Christ. And like Pastor Rome said, there's verses in Scripture talking about let us reason together. Another verse I want to turn to in this Bible right here is 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15. And this verse is, in a way, it's a call to action and a promise altogether. And this is a message that the whole church now needs to hear. And it's in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 15. We'll start at 15 right here. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. Gentleness and respect. Keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Christ may be ashamed of their slander. And there's that promise, right? That when we defend our faith in a respectful and gentle way, the people who accuse the church and accuse us will be ashamed of their slander. That's what Peter says right here in 1 Peter 3:15. There are many people who ask questions, and there's some hard questions, and we are not supposed to know every answer to every question. But if we can't even answer the questions that we ourselves ask, where does that leave us? Because it's not just about us answering questions that somebody else might ask you. It's not just about atheist, agnostic, skeptic coming to you and asking a question. What about the questions we ask ourselves about God? Shouldn't we know those answers too? Or at least pursue those answers? Timothy Keller, in his book, in the preface, I actually brought the physical book so I could read this and bookmarked it, because this is the call to action to begin off this series. And it's in the introduction right here. And Tim Keller says, whether you consider yourself a believer or a skeptic, I invite you to seek the same kind of honesty and to grow in understanding of the nature of your own doubts. The result will exceed anything you can imagine. When we pursue God, when we pursue truth, the results will exceed anything we can imagine. I encourage you to forget everything you may think you know. Pretend like you're Lee Strobel beginning this journey. Pursue God as if you don't know Him already. I don't know where we're all at. Some of us may confidently feel we have these answers. Some of us may feel like we have no answers. But when we pursue them, we'll find that there's more out there. There's more answers to our questions than we may realize. And God is a God that provides answers at the right time when we need them. This week, the first part of the series, The Reason for God, we're titling this The Uncaused First Cause. It's a fitting start, right? In Christian apologetics, I find that there are kind of two sections. There's two steps to the journey to proving this book or to defending this book. And that first step is that uncaused first cause. First, we got to get it on the table, does God exist? First, we got to know whether we're atheists or whether we're theists. The second step is knowing whether Jesus Christ is who He claimed to be. Knowing whether when Jesus of Nazareth said, before Abraham even was, I am, whether He was crazy or whether He was God. And that's the second step. So this week when we start off with the uncaused first cause, we're talking about theism. We're talking about God Himself. And next week, Pastor Rome's going to bring the word entitled The Christian Synthesis that will tie into the belief in Jesus Christ. Because there is two steps, and every journey has steps. That doesn't mean we're not going to talk about Jesus here, because we will. But it is important to note that you may encounter someone when you defend theism. And somebody may say to you, well, that doesn't prove the Christian God. It just proves that there is a God. I say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, the first steps, you may still be at a place where it could be the Christian God or it could be the Muslim God. Theism, the first step, then you get to the step of Christianity. Interestingly, you can do it either way. You can't go backwards. We'll get to that, but I'm skipping ahead. I do want to address, though, why the title has the word uncaused in it, right? Because couldn't it just be the first cause, right? He's the first cause. But the reason that Christian apologists have inserted that term, the uncaused, in there, is because we have to, we're making the argument before it even starts when you insert the word uncaused. Because one of the most common objections to theism is when someone says, what caused God? Ask all the time, what caused God? We're not talking about the same God then, if you're asking that question. Because the whole point of God, the very God that we worship, part of what makes Him God is that He is uncaused. That He's the first one, that He's the bullet point at the beginning, and then the line stems out from there. So that's why we call Him the uncaused first cause. And doesn't there have to be an uncaused first cause? There's an illustration, this just popped into my head, that Frank Turek has used before, where he puts a timeline up on the screen. And he says, we're right here. Can there be an infinite number of days before today? What do you think? Can there be an infinite number of days before today? No, because we never would have gotten here, right? If there were infinity days before today, we would have never gotten here, because the timeline has to have a beginning point. And when we talk about science today, I'm no scientist. Science is always one of my struggles in classes, but science has shown us we believe in the Big Bang in the world today. The Big Bang has become one of the prominent views of the beginning. Well, that's saying it used to be that everyone believed that the universe existed forever, but now we believe in the Big Bang that says it had a beginning. As Christians, we should just say, yeah, the Big Bang makes sense. We just know who caused it. We know who started the universe into existence. When we describe the Big Bang, we say that everything suddenly exploded into existence out of nothing. That's exactly what I would expect if God were to utter the words, "Let there be light." Right? So for thousands of years, all of humanity pretty much, excluding Judaism and some other religions, believed that the universe was infinite. And yet here we are today, where now science has caught up and is saying, yeah, the universe had a beginning, like the Bible has said for thousands of years. There's another verse I want to go to, speaking of that beginning. No, it's not Genesis 1:1, by the way. Should have used that one, though. Go with me to Romans chapter 1. First of all, I wish I could just read the whole chapter. Romans 1 is phenomenal. But if you go to Romans 1:20, Paul writes this in his epistle to the Romans. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. Whew. Think of it's a little harsh, right? People are without excuse. It says, and I'll continue because I tended to stop it there, but when we talk about the world today and the struggles we're going through, I think this verse can be relevant. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like immortal human beings and birds and animals and reptiles. There's another translation that puts it this way. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie. I see that in the culture today. We exchange the truth about God for a lie. But interestingly, this verse seems to be pretty clear, right? It says, God is clearly evident. So why are we having this conversation? Why do we still have the big conversation, as it's often called? The big conversation about the existence of God. Why are we still having this conversation if it's evident? Why does he feel distant if he's evident? Maybe it's because we aren't opening the door. Maybe it's because, as a culture, and I'm speaking broadly here, and hopefully the church is different, but I think sometimes we can follow the culture a little too much, we've shut the door on God. We threw God out and then wonder why he feels distant in the world today. Our culture is continually moving further from God, and then we wonder why we're struggling with the things that we struggle with. There's a lot we're going through these days. I'm just reminded of what Ronald Reagan said, if we ever forget that we're one nation under God, we're going to be a nation gone under. We in the world today really got to remember where our focus is at. And this includes the church, because the church can sometimes follow the slope. We can sometimes go along with it. And then we get to where we are today, and we wonder how we got here. We got to renew our focus and focus back on God. And to do that, we got to understand why we need to focus on God in the first place. And that brings us back to apologetics and the reason for God. I was given the honor of being able to teach the Bible Foundations class at the Academy my senior year. And at the beginning of every single class, I put the same slide on. They probably got bored of it after a while. I use the same slide every time. Oh, there he is, and there's the same slide this week, once again. 3 questions were on the slide. By the way, note, there was no answers on this slide. It was just the questions first to get you thinking, and then the rest of the class was spent pursuing the answers that Christianity provides. But there's the 3 questions first. These 3 questions were as follows. Where do we come from? Where do good and evil come from? And what happens to us when we die? These are the questions that sum up what we call worldview. And what is theism's answer to that? There's an analogy that I used once while writing an article. I talked about this 7-Eleven. I just moved into a new house, and they were building a 7-Eleven, and I watched it, right? So like I drive by every day, I'd see it come together. Literally like the layering of the bricks, the building coming together. Now, when I drive by that 7-Eleven today and get gas there very regularly, I look at that and say, yeah, obviously someone built it. I saw somebody build that 7-Eleven. But would it even make a difference if I saw it being built? Would it matter? No. I can go to other 7-Elevens that I never saw being built, and yet I know that they were designed. We know that buildings are designed. We know this church was designed, right? Somebody built this. This just didn't pop out of nowhere all of a sudden randomly, right? And yet, when we look at, like, let's take the 7-Eleven again, for example. Isn't it literally just like a box? It's like a big square. It's actually pretty simple, and yet we look at that and say somebody designed it. And I'm looking at all of you right now. You are all so much more complex, so much more beautiful than the 7-Eleven. And yet we debate whether anything created us. We debate whether we were built in the first place. If I just look at somebody's eye, it's 1 trillion times more complex than a building. We don't debate whether the building had a beginning. It's really important for us to understand these answers and these points because sometimes we will be confronted with them. Meaning plays a huge role in this as well, right? That 7-Eleven was built for a purpose, to give you little snacks and to give you some gas. Well, what purpose were we designed for if we're so much more complex, if we're so much more beautiful? We find the origin gives us meaning because we were designed and we were built for a purpose. I have some quotes here. I was going over this with Pastor Rome, and I was like, okay, I have like 4 quotes here. Let's narrow it down to 2 because I like to throw in a lot of quotes, but we narrowed it down to 2. One of them is from Frank Turek. He says this: God's signature is not just in the cell. It is in the cell, but it's not just in the cell. It's in all of creation. God is as necessary to the universe as a band is to music. Once the band stops playing, the music is over. Right? He sustains us. Not only did he create us, but he sustains us. If we use that band analogy, when the band is playing the music on the instruments, you hear the music, and the moment they stop, the music is over. If God were to let go, he sustains the universe. Someone has to sustain the universe, right? We see that the universe is expanding. I've heard there's a clip from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's not a Christian, not a theist, and he says, there's this mysterious thing in space that's causing the universe to accelerate in its expansion. I don't know what it is, but there's something causing the universe to accelerate. And I just look into him like, you're a genius. And I'm not a scientist, and I'm hearing you say that. I'm like, man, it sounds very familiar to me. Lee Strobel puts it this way, too, and this kind of puts the nail on the head. He says this: to continue in atheism, I would need to believe that nothing produces everything. Non-life produces life. Randomness produces fine-tuning. Chaos produces information. Unconsciousness produces consciousness. Non-reason produces reason. And then he ends it off by saying this: I simply don't have that much faith to believe that. I don't have enough faith to believe that nothing came out of everything and that everything came out of nothing. We look at the evidence for God, and I've been kind of throwing some points out here because we don't have time to get into every single argument for the existence of God. There's one argument that I really want to go through. Those are some other points, but I think the reason that there's one argument that resonates with people more than the others. Because you can hear the fine-tuning argument, yeah, that's all good, but how does that really affect me? It's kind of science, but there's one argument that is really relevant to us today that I know impacts me more than the others, and that's the moral argument. We talk about moral issues, don't we? We talk about the evidence of a moral creator. Most of the issues that we debate and get heated over today are moral issues, are they not? We talk about what's right and wrong, what's good and evil. Oh, that what you're doing over there, that's evil, that's wrong. That what you're doing over, oh, that's right, I agree with you. But we disagree over what right and wrong are. That's a problem, isn't it? That we disagree over what right and wrong are sometimes. And we try to justify morality. And before we get any further, there's one thing you always got to preface when talking about the moral argument. Because I've seen debates with the biggest intellectuals where the first thing the atheist says is, hold on, you Christian, are you saying that I can't be moral? No. That's the important preface is Christians are never saying that an atheist can't be moral. What we are saying is atheists can't justify morality, because where does it come from, right? Because some atheists actually seem to live more moral lives than some Christians. But the problem is they can't justify where that morality comes from. And when I was thinking about that term justify, it reminded me of something. So as someone who's about to be a broke college student, I have a job at the movie theater. And I've ran into a lot of you there at points because it's right over in Auburn. At the movie theater, those of you who have been there, we have this thing where we round up to donate, right? You get that all the time. You probably get tired of hearing it all the time at all the stores. You want to donate, you get tired of it. But I'm the one on the other end. I have to ask the question 1,000 times a day. So I ask the question, do you want to round up to donate to St. Jude? And what I'll do, actually, I'll be kind of crafty with it because I want to get as many donations as possible. So I'll rephrase it. Let's say like the total's $5.95. I'll say, you want to round up those 5 cents to donate to St. Jude? Hey, remember, it's just 5 cents. It's 1 nickel. But sometimes you get those people, and I try not to let it get on my nerves because you don't know where they're at. I'm not raving against these people, but I'm like, no, absolutely not. But that's not even the point I'm trying to make, because this is what I've noticed about human nature doing that. They'll say no, give it about 2 seconds, and then they'll say, I already donate to St. Jude. I donate so much money already. They're trying to justify themselves, aren't they? Right? And I'm not, again, some of you may have even done this. I'm not criticizing you. I'm making an observation that we try to justify what we're doing. And they'll even say no, and then I can tell in their brain, like I watch their mannerisms, like, oh man, I feel really bad about that. I didn't round up 5 cents. Here, let me justify what I'm doing. Or even they'll do this. This thing just blows me away. They'll say no. I'll give them their change back, and then they'll hand me the coins back and say, just put it in that little box right there to donate. It's like, I just asked you. But they try to justify it. And that's the same thing we're doing here with the moral argument. We're talking about how do we justify morality? How do we justify good and evil? When I did teach the Bible Foundations class over there, one of the illustrations I used, I just put a picture of Adolf Hitler on the screen. Just put a picture of him and just kind of sat there for a second and said, we all look at that picture and say, ugh, that guy was horrible. That guy was evil, right? We all agree he was evil. But let's take the naturalist approach, the atheist approach, to the logical conclusion. Let's say that there is no actual objective good and evil. There is no actual objective right and wrong. If I'm here and Hitler's here and we're having a discussion, I say, hey, I think murdering 6 million Jews in the Holocaust is wrong. Hitler says, I think he was right. Which one of us is correct? If there's no objective standard of right and wrong, how do we know what good and evil are? And yet, the point is that we all look at that picture and say that was wrong. The moral argument, and you can kind of like write this down and remember this, is without God, if God doesn't exist, objective moral values and truths do not exist. They can't, because there's no standard outside of you and I. However, objective moral values and truths do exist. We can agree on that. Sometimes we disagree about which ones they are, but we know there's got to be some sort of morality. We agree that murder is wrong, right? So they do exist. The third point is, therefore, God has to exist. Otherwise, we can't justify that point. You hear today, too, about just legislating morality. Just point out that every law legislates morality. It's just about whose morality are we legislating. That's another time. The moral argument, I think, is the most powerful argument for the existence of God in our culture today, because it resonates with us on that deep level. Because every argument that we have, all of our debates, all of our division is based on what is moral. But it reminds us that, wait a minute, if we don't have God as our foundation, there is no moral and immoral. We need God. That's our reason for God. He ought to be at the center of all of our conversations. Like Pastor Rome said about people asking him, is God left or right? What does God think about this issue or that issue? God is the very standard of morality. He is not left or right. And all of our conversations about these issues today, we have to remember to keep God at the center and answer those questions according to what God tells us. Not according to what affiliation we have, how we categorize people, but what does God want? And we need God. As we've seen, without God, we crumble. I didn't want to end on that. It's somewhat of a somber note because it's very real to us, what we're going through. So I thought of a better note to end on. There's a song, a very obscure song. I tried to find a music video for the song one time. I couldn't even find one because it was obscure. But it's a great song. It's called The Evidence for God. It's by Jeff Moore. Some of the lyrics of that song are,
Every mountain, every valley, your creation, it surrounds me. Every breath I breathe, every heartbeat, every sunrise that you give to me, these and so much more tell a story we cannot ignore, the evidence of God. And he lists a lot of things in that song, and it's a really good song. I would recommend anyone listen to it. We're surrounded by it. It's kind of a meh day outside, but I can still see the tops of the trees. Those trees are 1,000 times more complex than anything we put together. I see the evidence of God everywhere I go every day. And I see the need for God in our struggles in the world today. So one more story I wanted to tell. And some people hear a story that is in the realm of philosophy and they go, oh boy, I'm not going to be able to understand it. Hear me out, it's pretty simple actually. The story of Socrates. Socrates is one of the biggest names. There's the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure where he's referred to as Socrates. Maybe you'll know him from there. Socrates, the story of Socrates. Long story short, he's considered the wisest. A friend of his goes to the Oracle of Delphi and asks, who's the wisest in all the land? Replies, it's Socrates. The friend is shocked. He goes back to Socrates. Socrates is shocked too. It's like, what? I can't be the wisest. There's no way. So he goes on this investigation, this journey that we're encouraging you all to go on, that journey investigating for truth. He goes to interview people. He asks them questions. Let's take, for example, maybe he goes to a doctor and asks some medical questions. And the doctor goes on and on and on about everything the doctor knows about everything. At the end of the conversation, Socrates is just like, there's only one difference between me and the doctor. The doctor knows nothing, but he thinks he knows everything. I know nothing, but I know that I know nothing. And that's the difference in the two. And Socrates went on after this journey. He would go around, and this is where we get the Socratic method. He would ask a question to a question, and he drove people nuts. He just made them so mad because they would ask him a question, and instead of just answering directly, he would ask another question. You know who else did that? Jesus. Jesus used this method that we call the Socratic method, right? And he wouldn't give just a simple yes or no answer very often. Somebody would ask him, who is my neighbor? And he'd go into this long story for like 2 pages, all about who the neighbor is. He just could have answered yes or no, but he didn't. Socrates was pursuing truth. And by the way, people got so fed up with this guy that they killed him. So fed up with him. But he was pursuing truth. And he didn't claim to know everything, and neither should we, right? We're on this journey to find out the reason for God. And we talk about lots of reasons for God, but how amazing is our God, right? The songs we just heard. This God that we're talking about, that we're pursuing, is amazing. There are many gods throughout all of history that people have worshipped. But what God writes himself into the story? For all of history, people have believed in gods. The amazing thing about the God we serve is, for one, that he exists, as we've just talked about, and that he died for us and wrote himself into the story. Going back to Tim Keller's book again, he says this, towards the end, he says, in the Christian view, the ultimate evidence for the existence of God is Jesus Christ. If there is a God, we characters in his play have to hope that he put some information about himself in the play. But Christians believe he did more than just give us information. He wrote himself into the play as the main character in history, his story. When Jesus was born in a manger and rose from the dead, he made that sacrifice and wrote himself into the play. Yes, there's amazing evidence for the existence of a God. The cool thing about our God, he's the only God who wrote himself into the story, and the only God who rose from the dead, and the only God that all of our Western world has been based around. We're built on Judeo-Christian values from this one guy. And for me, this is the easy part, right? For me, this is the easy part, the evidence, the information. The harder part is acting it out. The harder part is keeping this in the center of your world every day. God showed himself to us this way by writing himself into the story and dying for us. There's nothing more important than that. He knit us together in our mother's womb. We have meaning. We have purpose. We're designed for a purpose. And one of those purposes is to pursue him and to love him. I encourage you, church, in the world today, with all the challenges we go through, keep God at the center and pursue truth above all else. He is the one who claimed he is the way, the truth, and the life. I could keep going on, but I'll land the plane here. Pursue him who claimed that he is the truth. God bless.